An old man in a neatly pressed but dated suit stood before the gleaming glass doors of the city's grand concert hall, clutching a small folded piece of paper. He was blocked by a young woman with a clipboard and an earpiece, her smile polite but firm. "Sir, I'm sorry, but this is a private event. Your name isn't on the guest list." The man, Arthur Pendleton, cleared his throat softly. "I was invited by the guest of honor," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "He said this would be enough." He offered the worn note, the ink slightly faded. The woman glanced at it, a flicker of impatience in her eyes. "We need official confirmation, sir. Security is very tight. I can't just let you in." What she didn't know was that the man she was turning away wasn't just another fan. He was the reason the celebrated author inside was even holding a pen today. Just as Arthur was about to turn away, a powerful figure saw the quiet standoff and began walking toward them, an action that would bring the entire glamorous affair to a screeching halt. That old man, holding a simple note, was the secret first chapter of the story everyone was there to celebrate, and the world was about to find out. Arthur was 78 years old, a retired librarian who spent 40 years surrounded by the scent of old paper and binding glue. He didn't seek the spotlight. He preferred the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights over the hushed reverence of a reading room. But when he read that Leo Vance, the boy he once knew, had won the country's most prestigious literary prize, a feeling of deep pride swelled in his chest. He had to be there. Their story didn't start in a fancy hall, but in the dusty aisles of the Mill Creek Public Library 30 years ago. Leo was a troubled teenager, all sharp angles and simmering anger, often sent to the library as a form of detention. He wasn't there to read, he was there to be contained. But Arthur saw something else. He saw a lonely kid building walls. One afternoon, instead of shushing him, Arthur placed a book on the table where Leo was carving his name. No lecture, just the book. Leo ignored it. The next day, Arthur did it again with a different book. On the third day, Leo started reading. Arthur became his quiet guide, not just to literature, but to life. He taught Leo that the stories in his head, the anger and the hurt, could be put on paper. He stayed late, reading Leo's clumsy first attempts, offering gentle corrections and unwavering encouragement. He was the first person who ever told Leo his voice mattered. Leo went on to become a literary giant, but Arthur never asked for anything, content to have been the lamplighter for a brilliant mind. He never imagined the system would see him as someone who didn't belong. The entrance hall was a sea of black ties, shimmering gowns, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Photographers' flashes popped like small, silent fireworks. Arthur stood just outside the main doors, the polite but firm rejection still ringing in his ears. The young coordinator had moved on, speaking into her earpiece, her expression serious. "No, I have no record of an Arthur Pendleton. Please maintain perimeter." Arthur looked through the glass at the swelling crowd. He saw critics he recognized from television, publishers whose names were on the spines of 1,000 books in his old library. He felt a familiar pang of invisibility, the same feeling he'd had his whole life, of being a background character in a world full of stars. He tried one more time, approaching a different security guard near the side. "Excuse me," he said, holding out the note again. "The author, Mr. Vance, he wanted me here." The guard gave him a sympathetic but weary look. "Look, pal, A lot of people want to be here. Without a ticket or your name on the list, my hands are tied." Defeated, Arthur stepped back and leaned against a cool marble pillar. He could hear the opening remarks begin inside, the sound muffled through the thick glass. He pulled the worn note from his pocket and read the short, handwritten line one more time. "Arthur, none of this would exist without you. Please be in the front row. Your friend, Leo." He folded it carefully, the sharp burn of disappointment in his chest. He wasn't angry, just deeply sad. But then, from across the lobby, the director of the Literary Foundation, Eva Rostova, a woman known for her sharp intellect and even sharper gaze, noticed the solitary old man by the pillar. She paused her conversation with the senator, her eyes narrowing. She saw the dejected posture, the simple suit, the quiet dignity. Something was wrong. The scene was a quiet storm in a teacup. The library in 1993 was dimly lit long after closing time. Rain streaked down the tall arched windows. A 15-year-old Leo sat hunched over a table, scribbling furiously in a worn notebook, his face a mask of concentration. Arthur sat across from him, not speaking, simply providing a safe, quiet space. Leo had been caught shoplifting that week, and the world was ready to label him a lost cause. His parents were overwhelmed, his teachers frustrated, but Arthur saw the raw energy not as a flaw, but as fuel. "What are you writing?" Arthur had asked gently. Leo grunted, not looking up. "Nothing, just stupid stuff." "There's no such thing as stupid stuff when it's yours," Arthur replied, pushing a cup of hot tea toward him. "Words have power, Leo. They can build worlds or burn them down. The choice is yours." That night, for the first time, Leo read his work aloud. It was a raw, angry poem about feeling invisible. It wasn't polished, but it was honest. Arthur listened, truly listened, and when Leo finished, he didn't critique the grammar or the meter. He just nodded slowly and said, "I see you, Leo. I hear you." That was the moment everything changed. It wasn't just about books anymore. Arthur became the anchor in Leo's tumultuous life. He gave him keys to the library so he'd have a place to go when home was too loud. He read every draft, every story, every clumsy attempt at a novel. When Leo won a small local writing contest, Arthur was the only one in the audience. He never called himself a mentor or a teacher. He was just Arthur, the man who held the light steady while a young writer found his way out of the dark. He never expected credit. The success of the work was the reward itself. But as he stood outside the grand hall, he realized that the world only celebrated the final polished book, never the quiet, tireless editor of the first messy draft. The ceremony was now in full swing. Eva Rostova excused herself from the senator and walked with purpose across the marble floor. Her heels clicked with an authority that made people instinctively step aside. The young coordinator saw her approaching the restricted entrance and hurried over. "Director Rostova, is there a problem?" Eva ignored her. She stopped directly in front of Arthur, her expression unreadable. She looked from his kind, tired eyes to the worn note he still held in his hand. "May I?" she asked, her voice calm but commanding. Arthur, startled, handed her the note. She read the words, then looked back at him, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "You are Arthur Pendleton?" she asked. Arthur nodded, his heart beginning to pound. "The librarian from Mill Creek?" He could only manage another nod. Eva's face softened. A slow, genuine smile spread across her lips. She turned to the stunned coordinator and the security guard. "Hold the presentation," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "This man isn't a guest. He is the guest of honor." A hush fell over the immediate area. Without another word, Eva offered Arthur her arm. "Mr. Pendleton," she said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "your seat in the front row is waiting." Together, they walked past the velvet ropes down the main aisle of the silent auditorium. Every head turned. On stage, Leo Vance, who had just been introduced, stopped mid-sentence. His eyes scanned the crowd, and then he saw him. Tears welled in the famous author's eyes as he watched the woman who ran the literary world escorting the quiet, humble librarian who had started it all. The rest of the ceremony was a blur for Arthur. He sat beside Eva Rostova, a bottle of water untouched in his hands. When Leo finally took the stage to accept his award, he set the glittering trophy aside. He didn't thank his agent or his publisher first. He looked directly at Arthur. "There's a man sitting in the front row tonight named Arthur Pendleton," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "He's not a critic or a publicist. He was a librarian. When I was a kid who the world had written off, he handed me a book. He didn't just teach me how to write. He taught me that I was worth writing about. This award," Leo said, picking up the trophy, "is not mine. It belongs to the quiet giants, the librarians, the teachers, the mentors who see a spark in the dark and have the patience to tend it into a flame. It belongs to Arthur." The hall erupted in thunderous applause, a standing ovation not for the famous author, but for the unseen man he honored. After the event, past the cameras and the handshakes, Leo pushed through the crowd and wrapped Arthur in a hug. There were no grand words, just a shared silence that said everything. A week later, a package arrived at Arthur's small apartment. Inside was the heavy, gleaming award. Tucked beneath it was a small handwritten note on a piece of library cardstock. It read, "For the man who built my first and most important library. Thank you for seeing me." Arthur placed the award on his bookshelf, not among his own few treasures, but right between two worn copies of the first books he ever gave a troubled boy. It was never about the recognition. It was about knowing the story had been told right, and that the quietest voices can leave the loudest echo.